Catch 'em all, Joe! Sidney Crosby, the golden goal!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Backstage Project podcast. I'm Mark Silver, your host, and this is our introduction to our very first episode, which I got to do with Rick Chisholm. Rick is an incredible legend in the world of sports and television production in Canada. I got the privilege to work with him around the 2012 Olympics when we were working for CTV and Rogers with a consortium of other broadcasters. In our chat today with Rick, we go down memory lane for him, for me, we reminisce a bit, and we really focus on many moments throughout Rick's career that, quite frankly, I didn't know about. It was an amazing chat. It's incredible to hear everything that Rick has done. And when you're finished listening to it, please let me know your feedback. And I'd love to learn more to be able to make these episodes as great as possible. I hope you enjoy episode number 1. Rick, welcome to the Backstage Project podcast. You're our first guest on our first official episode. How do you feel about that?
I feel honored. This is great. I mean, the opportunity to sit around and talk about myself is something I always enjoy. You know that.
I'm looking forward to it. Absolutely. So over the past couple of years, I've been one of your many loyal followers, really watching you from afar on social media as I believe you've been enjoying the fruits of your labor over the years with Michelle, always by your side. So aside from those of us who are part of your vast social following and seeing what you're up to through those platforms, what are you really up to now? If you want to describe it a bit.
I think the easiest answer to that and the quick answer to that is trying to enjoy myself as much as I possibly can. What does that mean? It means a lot of travel. We just got back from a aborted world cruise that lasted 2.5 months of 2 months, which basically started in all the way down the coast of South America, down to Antarctica, and then we got to Australia through the going across the Pacific Ocean, but that's Australia's as far as we got to. But travel, Mark, I think is the big one. And maybe that's not the big one. The biggest thing is staying in contact with people and friends. We made have a lot of good friends and family from many years of working and everything else, and staying in contact with them and keeping up to date with people is probably something that Michelle and I enjoy the most.
No, it's great to hear, and that's that was something I wanted to get into later, but I'm glad that you brought it forward of how important that contact and communication is to life now. More than ever, as many of us are seeing who haven't had the luxury of time the way that we have been able to have over the last few weeks.
Yeah.
When you and I first crossed paths about probably 12 years ago to almost the day. It's funny how time flies. You had already spent a decade at least, at TSN. And during that time, the way I looked at it from an outsider, I was a fan at that point. I didn't know the insides of the sports industry back then. But from the outside, certainly TSN became Canada's real undisputed sports leader. Certainly rising above the likes of CBC at the time, and Sportsnet had yet to really make its rise. So if you take yourself back to, let's say, the mid-90s, which is around the time that you were making this transition to join TSN. If you can remember and share with us, what did you think at the time you were getting into? And you can go a little bit into maybe the process of even joining TSN, if those memories are with you and present. And then, thinking about going into TSN at that time, could you have ever predicted where that decision to join TSN led the rest of your career?
That's a good one to end with. I see it clearly now, Mark. But listen, I'm going to have to divide that into two categories when you say join TSN, to join TSN, because really there was two elements of my TSN career. I came to TSN kind of through a back door. I knew some people who worked there. I was not one of the ones. I was working at CBC Hockey Night in Canada at the time. And I was not one of the ones in 1984 when TSN got formed. We went, cable TV, that's never going to work. My first reaction was, wow, sports television like 24 hours a day. Why didn't someone think of that a long time ago? Well, I guess they needed the technology. So I was working at CBC doing Hockey Night in Canada, freelancing around, and there was something lacking in my experience at CBC. I'd been there for 8 or 9 years. Cuts had begun to happen. There was an attitude in there that it didn't really sit well with me. And I went and talked with a gentleman named Rick Brace, and he said, I loved his energy. I've known Rick. He was a CBC guy also. Basically, everyone back in those days was a CBC guy. There was only like one crew at CTV. So I went and talked to him, and he offered me a job to do their hockey instead of Hockey Night in Canada. Well, you would think at the time that people would go, well, that's a no-brainer, turn them down. But there was something about TSN, and there was something about the 3 or 4 people that I knew at TSN that when I talked to them, I loved their energy. I just loved how they were alive and really talked television production. And this is not a knock at CBC. They were just older. That spark wasn't at CBC. It had died out. Their Hockey Night in Canada crew knew everything, and they couldn't really be told anything. And this is difficult to say and everything, but the opposite was true at TSN. Now, a lot of that could be because TSN was a lot younger. And if I remember correctly, I went in to freelance with them in 1989. So they'd been going for 5 years. And when I first walked into the building, I was shocked. It was like walking into a university campus. I mean, everybody, I think I turned 40 in my first year. I turned 40 in my first year at TSN. Everyone else was like, if you were like over 25, you were a pretty old guy. So, wow, this isn't going to work. But there was something about it. I went on the road with the Jimmy Houstons and Gary Greens and Gord Cutlers, and I had been on the road with CBC for 7 or 8 years. And this is just different. This is just an energy who people wanted to, just had a passion to do television. Now, they're the underdog. People would, they didn't even know about our hockey package really, but inside the group of the production group that I worked with, and I go back to emphasize again, because I think ultimately ended up being very important. I was like at least 15 years older than most of them. But these are bright kids. These were really bright kids, and kids who were like really interested in the game. So I stuck with them. I did all their hockey for them. I started the World Junior Championships with them in Saskatoon and worked that with them, and that was fun. Did all their hockey packages, did the CFL packages, did a lot of Blue Jays games, a lot of Expos games. And every crew I met, I liked. I just liked being with them, which is an important part of my career. I have to like the people that I'm with. It's absolutely imperative for me. I found out years later that if we can't get along and I can't be in a creative mind, I can't let my creativity flow because I'm worried about what this person might do or this might happen. Didn't have any of that at TSN. It was just like, let's just get the job done. You weren't traveling first class by any means of the imagination. It turned out that we ended up being. And I ran into a guy named Keith Pelly, who Keith is about 15 or 16 years younger than me and a dynamo at the time. And he was working in the newsroom, which I didn't have very much to do with at all. I was doing live events. And he came out to do his first football game, and he was something special. He was a spinning top. The very first time I flew in from London after a holiday, and I was doing a CFL game when it was his first CFL game. And I tell this story because I go like, wow, this guy is like really young, like really young. And it's his very first game. And he says, meet me in the lobby at 11:30 at the hotel in Ottawa, and we'll drive to Lansdowne Park. And I said, okay. Well, he couldn't find the car. Like he lost his car. And I'm going, wait a minute. now. I worked hard. I mean, I've been in the business for almost 20 years. He's been in the business for almost 20 minutes. And I'm going like, okay, now I'm going to take instructions from this guy, and this guy can't find his goddamn car in a parking lot. So, and it was pretty crazy broadcast. By the third game, he might have been maybe the top producer I'd ever worked with. That's how quickly
Wow.
the learning curve was.
Wow.
All right. And that energized me even more, because I was going like, wow, like in 10 days, I'd be someone who like was so into how to improve the product. I'd never seen anyone who wanted to improve the product as fast and as hard and worked as hard to do it than Keith did. So years go on, Keith goes away and does works for the NFL. I continue to work for TSN. I got an opportunity to head up the production for the G7. It was actually called the G7+1 back in the day in Halifax, hired by Dome Productions. And they hired me as the executive producer, not as a director. Up until that time, I was a live director, and I stuck to live directing. But this is the first time that I was overall in charge of a broadcast, and an important one. I mean, it was, the 7 biggest world leaders in the world were there, and I had done these before as a director. This is the first time that the government had given it a contract to a private away from CBC. So it was important to do it correctly. But and it went really well. But what it showed me was that I had, instead of just being a narrow live director in a truck, which I loved and thought I would do for the rest of my life, it showed me that I had some kind of talent to be able to lead some people. And more surprisingly, I got a buzz from it. I got a buzz from offering to try this way, to teach them, to kind of guide them. And they were always very receptive. And so as the years go on, so I started there in 99. So in 97, when things started to change at TSN, and they were obviously part of the fabric of Canadian broadcast by that time. Our hockey broadcasts were I don't think they were as well respected of Hockey Night in Canada, but that probably more as a branding issue than it is a quality of production. Keith became president of TSN when he came back from the NFL, and asked me to run his production for him. And because of my experience in Halifax, I was all for it, and off we were to the races. 1997. Whoa! But the basics was still true. Everyone's 10 years older, so they're not. It's now maturing into a network, and I hit it at the right time. We went from a little cable network to into the stratosphere, where we came up with the Canada's #1 network, or whatever it was. I feel like they still use it. What is it? Canada's sports leader.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was something we took an immense amount of pride in. And I took an immense amount of pride in my time at TSN all the time. I just loved it. So that's basically how it all started. That was a long-winded answer, but
no, listen, it
was a long career.
Well said. Well, I'd like to pick up on the Keith Pelly part, because that's obviously where you and I first crossed paths through what Keith created. Yeah, and I want to, of course, focus now on the Olympics. So, looking at the Vancouver 2010 Olympic Winter Games, which was at the time, and I distinctly remember Stephen Brunt's epic piece describing it after the Olympics. It was known to be at the time such a seminal moment, for the country. And by the way, I know that, Alon and Mark are going to listen to this podcast at some point. So I want to make sure that they recognize that I referenced the games properly. It was,
and I'm not even sure what it is anymore.
I think I got it right.
Yep.
But getting kind of back to the question where I like to go, Rick, you were so deeply involved in this project. Well before, from my understanding, well before I got involved, years before even, maybe as far back as 2004, 2005. So I wanted to ask you, there's a few questions here, because this is really the story of what you did, your biggest project, I guess, near the end of your career. But I wanted to ask you, what made the games so special? Well,
I think number one, it was in your country. number two for me, I'm a Vancouver boy. So the opportunity to lead a production group into your city for your country was something that just kept growing. It was I knew right away that it was an automatic for me, and I knew right away, meaning that because I was running production at TSN at the time when CTV and they didn't call it the Consortium at the time, but CTV put the bid in with Rogers and the group. I was, even though Keith and the Consortium hadn't been formed yet, but I think the bid was what, 2004? Did you say?
Yeah, I think 405, maybe something around there.
Yeah, so I was the go-to guy. That they probably should have had the Consortium in place 2 years before they did. So I was the go-to guy that everyone at CTV would go, okay, Rick, what are we going to do about this? Or what are we going to do about that? Even though I wasn't officially put onto the Olympics, TSN was owned by CTV. So I was able to get into the broadcast really, really quickly. I went over to Torino to scout those games, which would have been the first winter games, the ones before Vancouver. And I really got the buzz. I really got the buzz. They put anchor positions up in the mountains, which I hadn't seen before, and which we replicated in Vancouver or Whistler. But it was such a huge project. It's really hard to go like, yeah, well, it's in your own country and it does television and I like television, so yeah, great. It turned out to be something. I knew it was going to be big, but it turned out to be so much bigger than I had anticipated. It was so much bigger because Yvonne Fitzanne, the head of CTV, spent so much more money than anyone else to get it. So it was drilled into my head right from day one. This cannot fail, and this can't be an average game. This has got to be the games that Canadians will remember, certainly the people of this era. I mean, you go 25 years from now, it would all happen again, I suspect. But there was automatically from the beginning, the idea of failure was just not thought of. It just couldn't happen. And it started as a television project when I was in Torino and I went to China, and it was a television show. By the time it took over and Keith became involved, Keith was the overall leader. The reason they didn't hire anybody, and I was part of it. They go, Ricky, are you going to? I went, no, you need a guy. I'm a production guy. You need a sales, marketing. You need someone who does the overall picture. I'm going to spend the money. Someone else has got to bring it in.
Very well put.
And it wasn't. And the obvious person was Keith. Keith had left TSN and had moved on to the Toronto Argonauts, who basically took a nothing franchise. There was nothing left with the Toronto Argonauts before Keith took it over, and he turned it around, as Keith does. He was able to turn it around by hard work and ingenuity and creativity, and being able to get along with people, and won a Grey Cup. But there was a Grey Cup to be played, hosted in Toronto for the first time in years. And Keith was committed to that in 2007, so he wasn't available until that game was over. So I remember being in a football game, I believe in Winnipeg, in the season of 2007. And this is now people are going like, are you going to run the Olympics? You're going to run the Olympics? And I said, well, I hope to be involved. But I wasn't, in my mind, I wasn't the right guy to run it. So I know it's a long story, but I saw Yvonne at this football game in Winnipeg in a corner talking with Keith. And I went, well, that's strange. And then Keith comes by my table and goes, okay, if I take it, will you join me? And I went, what, the Olympics? And he goes, yeah. And I went, yeah, if you're doing it, I'm doing it. And that's when it started. And that's the kind of magic that Keith and I have together, Keith is a leader. And he took a group of people. Well, I think he was the first hire, I was the second hire. And we built it from the ground up. Now, who gets that opportunity? at the 3/4 pole mark in one's career to hire and pick and handpick of people that you worked with all through the years. And we need a lot. We ended up with like, what was it, 1,400 people in Vancouver?
Yeah, it was truly unbelievable how many people we brought together for those 17 days.
Yeah. So you go, and so but that whole idea of you can't fail. Keith had a great line to me the first time. He goes, him and I'd be going down to his Argo office and we were beginning to plan. And he goes, first things first, Ricky. I said, what's that? Let's don't hire any stupid people. I said, well, you might have already done that, pal. But he was like, we need smart people. We really need smart people. And he dug around with some people. I knew a lot of people in the production. He went way out. That's how you became involved. That's how Alon became involved. But it just took off from there. And it's like, like never before. That was our catchphrase, like never before. And that's what it had to be like. And that turned into a lot of pressure.
Yeah, no. So the pressure I get from my side of it, I certainly saw it from your side of it. And I think when we look at what was accomplished, let's focus on the broadcast, which is what you led. I mean, the broadcast absolutely accomplished that. I remember a quote at the time, I guess near the end of the games, that the broadcast reached basically every Canadian and potentially the unborn. I mean, based on the audience ratings that we saw. So if you think back to kind of the end of the games and what we felt there, and I'm gonna skip London 2012 for now because that's just icing on the cake, I think, for all of us.
That was a lot. That was way more fun.
Yeah. So if you think back then and then kind of compare it to the last 10 years, and I know that obviously we had the London games, you had your production company still, you weren't completely in the kind of zen place that you are today, or will be soon enough again. If you think back to the country and what you might have thought about the country at the time, the way that game has brought us together, and you think to today, and maybe to be fair, maybe not this exact day given what we're going through at the moment, but maybe wind the clock back maybe to last summer, maybe after the Raptors had their own historic run. And we can use sports, because this is about sports and entertainment on our podcast here.
Yeah.
We can use sports as the common thread, and we won't dip too far into the sports and media business, because that obviously has changed a lot over the last 10 years. But if you think about the country and the way you thought about the country and the way that sports has the power to bring people together, just really off the cuff, tell me what you think about how the country has changed over the last 10 years.
Well, I think it started before that, but I don't think there was a person who signed on to that consortium. I don't think there was one person who signed on to that consortium who didn't kind of have a little bit of Canada in their heart and sort of in the back of their mind going, this is an opportunity for us to pound our chest, our quiet little country, to be a little bit louder, a little bit prouder. I know I carried it. I know almost everyone I worked with, yourself included, we all had that. And I think ultimately, to get to that, it was almost taken for granted by everybody that would happen. Like everything else, it never ends up being, the road isn't that straight and perfect. And, you just don't sign up and it goes, whoa, boom, this is going to be taken off. No, I mean, we sign up, we're all going, we go, oh, yeah. Boom, there's an economic crash in 2008. Well, I just started in November 1st, 2007. So, Keith and I are going like, well, this dream now is like millions of dollars behind, because it's like we're going in an economic time that affected the whole thing. It affected the hiring, it affected everyone's mentality, but it just made everyone dig in deeper. Everyone kind of knew it when they got hired on. We were in the middle of it. And everyone kind of knew that this is going to be a challenge to hit numbers on this thing. And at the same time, the pressure to make sure we get it right was going. And always in the back of everybody's mind was, let's just get to the games. Canada will take off. It'll be Canada's moment. Well, then you go through all the negative stories, that they start reading about cost overruns and the weather. And then as you get close to the games, you get, are they going to be able to run it on up in Cyprus because of the snow. They're going to fly it in and everything else. And this is beginning to look like an embarrassment.
You know, Rick, we quickly forget those moments, the negative stuff that was absolutely there.
But I think it added to the high. I think it added to the high for the country. I mean, because the country felt it. I mean, the country automatically, I believe, thought, the viewers, like, oh yeah, this is going to be great for Canada. Oh yeah, sure. Okay, opening night. It doesn't even go well. Opening night, an arm of the flame doesn't come up. You know, which is embarrassing. I remember sitting there because I had seen the rehearsal the night before, and there was only like a handful of us there. And I remember the rehearsal, and I'm watching this thing, and I'm going like, it's not going to come up at all. Not just one arm. I mean, I'm sitting in the control room going like, shit, holy shit, because my whole mind was going, the world's going to laugh at us. This is going to fall right down. Now, this is hours after we lose a competitor on the hills in Whistler. A slider from Georgia kills himself. And so I'm going like by the end of the first day, and then we have this Wayne Gretzky thing going to go like this other thing. It's pouring down rain. There's only one headlight in the truck. That, you know, it's like, it's just a disaster. And by the end of the first day, we're going, wow, we might embarrass ourselves. This might just be not the games that the country thought they would be. And it took sort of everyone to, you know, not just the television, but everyone in the country sort of going, oh, holding their breath, going like, what is going on here? And it took the games and the athletes to sort of bring it home. I think in the second day or third day up in Cyprus, we win the first gold medal, and that starts it off. And then it just sort of clicks, and all of a sudden people are out on the street, and they're singing the anthem, and how great is Canada? And then, you know, but more importantly, where I was watching other networks broadcasts, you know, and they were turning their negative story, which was very negative on day one competition day, to positive. You know, this is a great city. This is a great country. The people, they've had their difficulties, but boy, are the people ever friendly, got more cooperation. Place is gorgeous. And it started to turn around. And then it went, as far as I was concerned, like way bigger than I ever expected it to go. Like way bigger. Like it gripped the whole country. And it was great.
Yeah, that was amazing. And I mean, does anything stand out for you? Like since then, whether it was sport or something more cultural that you've seen Canada come together? I mean, obviously there's no comparison to that, not even London 2012.
The only comparison that I had, and you're too young to remember it. In fact, I don't even know if you were born yet. But in my generation, the only thing that I had seen that came remotely close to it was the Summit Series in 1972, where it had that was my experience. And I'd say I was working at the time, so I was working in Edmonton at a small station, and that grabbed the whole country by you know, like people lived and died with it. You know, there was like, if anyone ever talked nice about a Russian hockey player, it was like, yeah, well, you had to get into a fight to get out of that one. But that was the first one that I could remember. But there's been, you know, Canada has grown a lot, right? You can go back to Trudeau, where Trudeau kind of gave us a little bit of, you know, the other Trudeau gave us, you know, a lot of confidence. And me, as a person who graduated in the centennial year in '67, that I sort of graduated with this newborn confidence of about being a Canadian. I think that came a little bit from Pierre. And then the Summit Series, and then other things that happened that people were proud of as you know, Canadians. But it normally takes sports to galvanize the whole thing. And then we've had lots, you know, not as big as Vancouver, but I mean, Mike Weir winning the Masters was pretty damn big. Raptors win last year, boy, it probably wasn't as big as Vancouver, but it was pretty good. It wasn't the miracle goal, but it was pretty damn big for a sport that 20 years ago people hardly even watched. That was a bit of a ramble. I don't know if that's what you wanted, but
no. Listen, we're getting your perspectives and opinions on your career and your journey and how you saw things, and you've seen a lot. It's really amazing to hear. Speaking about one of the things that you've seen and memories, memorable moments, and I know you've already spoken about a few, but kind of thinking about your career, if there's one, moment, and it could be from anywhere in your career. It doesn't have to be the stuff where you and I crossed over, but if there's one moment that you would say is the most memorable, and maybe if you can harness that memory, give us a little bit of the story around why it's so memorable.
I knew you were going to ask this when you give me a heads up on this one, and this is obviously probably a no-brainer in a sense, but that question would come. But I got to tell you, I find it very, very difficult, very, very difficult to. I think the one to take 42 years of being involved in pretty big events, like 3 royal weddings and 2 federal elections and leaders debates and a ton of sports. It's the collective of working with people, and obviously the goal from Sidney Crosby was huge for the country and everything else. But I remember thinking no, this is getting too silly, overtime, and Crosby scores it. And I says, now it's just getting too silly. As big as a moment that was. But I was trying to think of something that was sort of more obscure. And I really couldn't, because it all comes back in sort of a mishmash, so I wrote a few things down to see if something would be jogging.
A great executive producer.
So here's the one story that I came out of, and this is totally out of the blue, but I remember being so proud of it because it was more like hands-on. So my biggest break in my career came in 1983 at the Brian Mulroney Conservative Convention in Ottawa. And as the director, I knew that if I could hit this one out of the park, then your life is never set up, but it would help. So the night before the convention, so basically, who do you got? You got Crosby from Newfoundland against Mulroney and against Joe Clark, who was a former prime minister. So the night before the speech night, we got permission to put a microphone that had just been invented. It was just, everyone sees them all the time now, but they were just little lavalier microphone on the seat. In front, so we taped it on the back of the seat in front of where Joe Clark was going to sit in Lansdowne Park. And it's because we thought it would, one, he had given us permission that we could record it. He had forgotten. And so there we are. I got an audio technician, myself, and a reporter named Mike Duffy, who made the deal with Joe Clark. And we are stringing cable at 3:00 in the morning along the floor and covering it all up so no one will see it and no one will know where it was going, and then taped it. So you could hardly even notice it. It was so small. It was brand new microphone. It wasn't even, CBC didn't even own it. It was given to them by the manufacturer. They said, hey, try this out at the convention. And we taped it onto the seat. There's 5 of us who knew. Arnold Lambert, who was the head of the production at the time, obviously Mansbridge would have known because, we were told about it. So long story short, the deal with the convention was that John Crosby from Newfoundland and Joe Clark had made a pact that they'd do anything to stop Brian Mulroney. So and I don't know, the 6th vote or something there, they went on for 12 hours. On the 6th vote, it became obvious that Joe Clark is the one who's going to have to give up his candidacy, and because he was behind Crosby. And Crosby goes, so he would stop and then give his delegates over to Crosby. And then Crosby would become the Prime Minister of Canada, ultimately. So Brian Peckford, a premier from Newfoundland, we follow him on the cameras all the way around the audience. We got the crucial moment, and he comes to Joe Clark. And Joe Clark and him stand up, and we get the whole conversation. Is basically, okay, you know what, Joe, you said, this is it. This is your time. This is your time. You've got to come over. We've got to do it now. Bring your delegates and everything. We got to stop Brian. And Joe Clark goes on for a while, but Joe Clark, and you can hear it all as clear as day. Eyes just going, oh my goodness gracious, this is unbelievable. 12 hours ago, we were on our hands and knees, me and Mike Duffy, taping this to the seat. So he turns around to his mother, and his wife Maureen was sitting there, and looked at his mother, and his mother goes, "No way." Joe has to turn on Crosby and basically turn the deal down. Goes, "No, we're staying in." And we got that whole thing, and then the next thing we know, we have Brian Mulroney as our prime minister for the next 8 years. But that was the one it was the first time I noticed like how much fun this could be. Like that was pretty crazy to be as wiped as we were, because anytime you do a big, huge show, by the time you get to the show, you're exhausted. And the last thing I wanted to do was be crawling over chairs in the middle of a convention floor, putting the microphone there, but it worked out. Out. That was a big story.
No, that I have stories that I recall in my career, which are similar, except that it seems like in the production business, there's some physical labor. In digital, we really just get carpal tunnel syndrome. There isn't really much more than that to speak of, beyond the odd all-nighter. Rick, there's probably a few more questions that we'll get to. Just a combination of things that we're gonna like to ask all the guests, or we're gonna ask you as well. But I think I wanted to summarize a couple pieces here that I had as questions, but you've already done a beautiful job of covering them, and you just help me weave the narrative here. So, I mean, it certainly sounds like above all else, that hot shot CFL producer from the let's call it the early '90s, Keith Pelly. You're certainly connected to him in a way that maybe words can't exactly describe, and I'm assuming him to you as well. Am I missing it? Is there anyone else really kind of in the career spectrum, like a talent, an athlete, someone from a league or a sports federation, whatnot, that has had a more lasting kind of impact and impression on you than what we've learned about your relationship with Keith today?
I wrote a couple down. There's one. There's a guy named Peter Martlinger. I don't even know if he's still alive, but you need somebody at the very beginning of your career to sort of spark you. And so this was a producer in very small educational television outfit in Edmonton who just for some reason took me under his wing, maybe because I drank with him. So he was important to sort of instill into me a passion for television and for the production of television. Then there was a guy named Arnold Amber, who's the father of David Amber, who's on CBC now. David and I worked together for a number of years, but Arnold was the head of what they call the CBC News Specials Unit, which I worked from 1981 to 1988, and with Peter Mansbridge and a very group of talented people, like a big time talented people. And so Arnold plus Peter and that gang was all, and then the next group in my life when I got out into the freelance world was Keith. And then Keith kept coming back into my life. He was a producer with me in the truck. Then he goes to the NFL. Then he comes back as the president. He brings me inside to be his winger. And then he has a falling out with Yvonne Fetzan, who just bought us from CTV, and he goes over to the Argos to run them. And then the Olympics get called. Yvonne needs somebody, and ultimately Yvonne had to. It was funny, in the whole country, everyone knew that, everyone in the industry knew that it would be, well, except for the people at CBC. They kept waiting that someone was going to get plucked out of CBC. I knew there wasn't a chance in hell that was ever going to happen. But it was Keith. That they were waiting for Keith to become available, and to the point where it cost them a little bit because we started the project a little bit late. But I think we caught up. We did all right.
I can't imagine any leader other than Keith taking us to where we needed to go. Not just as a leader for us, the team, but also the ability to manage at the time, Rogers and CTV, plus the sponsors that were present. I mean, we really needed someone who had that charisma that people wanted to be a part of, that infectious personality that you just can't resist with Keith.
Yeah, Keith also has the ability to let you run your department, but his finger is firmly inside it. You always wanted to know what was going on and everything, and but he was infectious. Thanks
for taking us a little bit down memory lane and reflecting back on those people in the early days of your career that that were influential in building up the character and your perspectives and values that carried you through. Looking back at those early days, and I know I didn't prep you for this one, but thinking back, what do you wish you knew then that you know now? If you had to pick a couple of things.
Well, that would take the whole joy of the of the trip out. It's like anything else. It doesn't matter what profession you're in. I'd imagine it's always a learning experience, and it should be a learning experience. And I would have liked to have been smarter. The whole idea of working with people, I think, is a bit of a talent, and it takes a while to sort of know when to push, when to pull, when to motivate, when to whip. And I think I could have those skills could have come to me a lot earlier but I just didn't go that route. I was a director live director is like a live director. You go in, you're a gunslinger. You go camera 2, camera 3, camera 4. Okay, they won. Good. Okay, we go into the bar for a beer. And being inside and being up the opportunity to lead people. To me, is a way bigger growth game. It's way more complicated than I would have ever given any credence to. Way more complicated, but way more satisfying, especially, as I've mentioned time and time again, especially if you're surrounded by the right people and the people who have the project in mind and the goals in mind and keep them in mind and who are smart. So Keith said, we're not going to hire any dumb people. Don't hire any stupid people, Rick.
Yeah, and that concept of people and surrounding yourself with people is certainly something that I learned very well through my experience with you back then that I've carried through and some of the decisions I've made. I think as you look at kind of the way the world is kind of now, or maybe a few months from now again, and someone who aspires to be, and you've done so many things in your career, so let's focus on kind of sports media. I don't want to be too specific about broadcast, digital rights, programming. There's so many elements to it. But someone who kind of aspires to be in the industry, let's not worry about the oligopoly, unfortunately, that's been created based on the consolidation of sports in this country. And but if someone wishes to be in sports media, what kind of advice do you think you'd have for them?
That's a tough one.
Another tough one.
Because I've been out for 7 years, and it's completely different. I mean, when you and I did and it was basically just you and I who did the Vancouver Olympics. We did a real nice job too.
Yeah, beautiful.
I mean, the iPad hadn't been invented yet.
That's right. Yeah.
So what you guys did in the digital department was like brand new. Now it's everyday life, and it's moved beyond it. So what advice I would give, I would first of all, I think from where I'm sitting, I think it's really tough. I think my route was a lot easier in the sense that I was usually backed up by networks that weren't going to go anywhere for a long period of time before everything started to change. And I was out before it really changed. Now, there's part of me goes, geez, I wish I could come back now, because I really do love the idea of doing when I left CBC in '88 and I was doing freelancing for Hockey Night in Canada, and then started with TSN and everything else. It was a network. I loved my 9 years of being what I call the freelancer, that I owned the production company. The production company was me. But I loved it. There was something I loved, and there's something that I would love if I was a young person nowadays. I would get so far into the whole digital workup and everything, being able to shoot your own, edit your own storytelling. I'm a big person in storytelling, as you know, and you've got great opportunities, but it's really hard, and it's really hard to get paid for it. But there's part of me that goes, I think I would have been embraced this new digital really, really well. I really do, because there's parts of this, some of the things that I see, a lot of the things that I see out there that, and I find out, they didn't get paid all that much right now, I go, Jesus, that is really good. You know what? in the times we're in right now, where I'm actually spending more time watching video and listening to people and the writings and everything else, there's a lot of talent out there. There is a lot of talent out there. And but to build a career, I think you'd have to throw yourself in it. And I have no idea how to swim in that water now, because I don't have to. Because I think it's really, really hard, and at the same time, I think it's really, really exciting. I mean, I look at the Athletic and what they've done in a year and a half. I go like, well, this is good stuff. It's really good stuff on a daily basis. Maybe not quite so much now as they're making up the stories, but when the world is playing sports, that's a great one. A lot of the publications, Politico and Huffington and there's a lot of things out there that, just used to be, I watched Peter at 11 o'clock and then I'd go to bed, or now you watch Lisa at 11 o'clock and then you go to bed. Those days are over. You're getting, I'll tell you, since I've been home, I haven't even hooked up my cable because there's no sports to watch. and the thing that bothers me, the other side of it is, where I worked for a long time in the networks, being CBC and CTV, when I was in the news world, which I loved, the game's changed now. I can't watch it anymore. I don't think it's just, I'll get my news from somewhere else. Like I just can't watch. I think it's very difficult times, especially with the president and that. But where you would start, I think you just have to jump in, and I think it's like, how long can you tread water before you find your niche? There's niches there, lots of people are doing it, but it was when I started, it was like you could work for CBC, or you could work for, let me think now, CBC.
Right.
There was hardly anyone at CTV. There was like one sports crew at CTV, and that was it, and they were awful. They were horrible. And that now there's like lots out there, but try to find it. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, listen, my perspective is the same. I mean, it is challenging to take what I would call a tried and true route, the route that you were able to take. I mean, you were probably on the other side of it. You created the route because networks didn't exist. And looking at it today and looking how, potentially what we're going through now is going to change the economics around sport, every part of sport, whether it's professional or amateur. I think now more than ever, the skills you have and the skills that many people that you and I know have, whether they're well into their careers or at the beginnings of their careers, those skills are going to be in high demand. And if those sports want to be broadcast and want to be covered, they're going to need these multi-platform storytellers who can be a jack of all trades. We began to hire that 10 years ago as the kind of first generation of digital folks who were really just writers or web producers that put up content, actually had to be more dynamic. And we see people across the spectrum of sports, whether it's in the media space or the team space or the league space, they've developed these kind of personalities. More influencers, I think, is a word you would use to describe it now, versus broadcasters, which is absolutely the way that you and I looked at it back in our time together. But like you said, I mean, you have to be a self-starter. You have to use the technology platforms, whether that's YouTube or other platforms, or obviously podcasting is something, as we're talking on a podcast right now, to use the distribution platforms. Because they're free and they're accessible, and then it's up to you to figure out how to reach and build an audience.
Yeah, and monetize it.
Monetizing is a nice thing to do. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, you got to eat.
You got it. Well, Rick, listen, thanks for taking the time today. I know we have time given the nature of what's going on right now in the world, but if I haven't mentioned it before, and maybe I haven't, but this stage that we have here with the podcast gives me a platform to do it. I look back at my time, working very closely with you, and we're fortunate the way the chips fell that we had that opportunity to work together. I mean, I look back at my time with you as an unbelievable and exhilarating time in my career where, and I'll put quotes around it, but I got to work with a living legend, and it wasn't just And it really, I'm not just saying it wasn't just about everything you've accomplished, which thank you so much for sharing that with us today and kind of some of the inner workings of how you got there. But it was that version of Chiz, of Rick, that you were near the end of your career, where you had this confidence about you. And I wouldn't call it swagger or arrogance. I would say that you were smart. You knew what your job was. And as you've already mentioned to us today, like, you knew that it was more about people than maybe it was about output. And the people side was where you over-indexed, and I'm forever grateful for having that.
Mark, if I could just, I thank you very much for those kind comments. We had great years together for sure. But we did. There was a word you just mentioned that I haven't touched on, which was probably the key, and I honestly believe it was the key to the success in Vancouver. And I don't think I told it very well. But storytelling and the art of storytelling. We made that a priority in Vancouver. That I remember being asked by Rick Grace, who was running CTV at the time, and Yvonne Fitzanne, saying, what sport should we get? Like 2 years leading up, should we get sliding sports and bring them on weekends and everything? And I said, don't bother. They're not going to watch them until it comes to the Olympics. Storytell. And we opened up that department very quickly and put in a guy named Don Young, to head it up as someone who very, very well. But storytelling ended up being the backbone to the Vancouver Olympics. And even to the London Olympics, that, to some extent, to actually be able to weave a good story about these athletes, to get people's attention, to make them watch something that they would not normally watch and won't watch again for 4 more years, and I thought we did that very, very well. And I thought that Yvonne Fitzanne gave us the license to brag about our country. Jingoistic, I think, is a term that he would use. I don't give a shit. Let's be jingoistic. Let's pound our chest. That's, you don't get that freedom. You didn't get that at the time, that freedom at CBC at the time. They'd go, no. We have to be correct and everything, and don't be cheerleaders and everything else. And I totally understand where they come from that one, and I kind of get it. But when the games are when it's about the games and they're in their backyard and everything, you can cheerlead a little bit. And I'm not ashamed to say that we did, but we put the athletes out front from the beginning. From 2 years out, we put the athletes up front. And I think it made a difference by the time we got to the games. Some of them were already household names. You think of the time when we were in Whistler and Johnny Montgomery wins a gold medal. Here's an athlete who we had done a story with. Here's an athlete who basically looked at the list of sports and said, okay, which sport, he's from Saskatchewan, which sport can I do that might get me into the Olympics? And then picks, what was he, a luger, or he was
skeleton?
Skeleton. And I go, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to race frontwards down a bloody mountain on ice. And then he does it, and then he wins gold medal in his own country, and then he goes swaggering through Whistler that we had to fight tooth and nail to get that anchor position in Whistler. And he grabs a beer, and it becomes legendary in Canadian folklore history, right? And then a moment like that, that might be the one moment better than the one thing that I remember sitting in my hotel room then, because I rushed home to watch it, and looking at the screen and going, okay, so listen, it took 3 years to get that site okayed. But I remember sitting there in the hotel room. It turns out that my wife, Michelle, was directing that, right? And so there I am going like, okay, it took me forever. I remember walking on early in December, like 2006, in Whistler, and it was very, very cold day, and I got Rick Brace, who was basically the head of CTV at the time, and he kept saying, what are we doing? Why are we walking in Whistler? You're gonna put the anchor position in the IBC in Vancouver. I said, yeah, but we have to have an atmosphere. It's got to look like Olympic. We'll put them in Whistler. That isn't going to work. Move on. So from that negativity from the very first time to that moment of John Montgomery grabbing that beer mug and chugging it, and then going to get interviewed by Jennifer Hedger was pretty magical for a Canadian moment. Pretty magical indeed.
Yeah, no, I remember it vividly as well. No, that's great. So listen, this is great reminiscing and chatting, and I really appreciate your time. I already gave you my pedestal pitch.
You don't have to go over that again. But
but listen, I wish you obviously all the best, and hopefully you're back to you're back to your plan for you and Michelle and the kids. For as you enjoy your time now, that you well-deserved time, as we've heard, from on your knees duct taping in 1982 to in your hotel room watching John Montgomery have a pitcher of beer walking around Whistler. You certainly have varied stories to tell from both the road and the control room. And just congratulate you again on everything you've accomplished. And I know there are awards that go with that, Screen Awards, Geminis, ratings, all those things. But to come back to a common theme, the people, the people that you've touched, that have touched you, I think that's what's most important from what I'm hearing in your journey.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. The more I've been away from it, the more important it has become. And during these times, it just brings it home even more. These are very, very times we have not seen before. So thanks for the opportunity to tell some of the past stories, and let's just hope we can get through this and stay safe. Everyone stay safe. Obey the rules. I think it's important so we can get back doing what we like to do.
Thank you. You as well. Rick, thanks for joining us on the Backstage Project podcast for our first episode. Really appreciate you taking the time to reminisce with me and educate our audience on all the great things that you were able to accomplish and lives you were able to influence over the course of your career.
Well, it's been fun, Mark, and it's great to see you again. Hopefully we can, lift a beer together very, very soon. I appreciate it, and I do take it as a bit of an honor and a little bit of a tick mark of another tick mark in their career to be the first one on your new podcast. So thank you for that opportunity, and thank you for thinking some of my stories might be worth listening to. Appreciate it. Stay safe, everybody.
All right. Thanks very much, Rick. We will speak to you and hopefully see you very soon.
The Backstage Project podcast is brought to you by Ready, Set, Go. They help organizations create extraordinary digital products. To learn more, go to readysetgo.design. If you would like to get in touch with Mark and the team at the Backstage Project podcast, please email us at info@tpbpodcast.com.